Oh, and I'm doing an Instagram live too, so I'm going to add some information here. Hi, add title. Okay. We'll get going. For those of you who are just joining for the first time, I'm Courtney Bogtazzo. I work with Stateless. I'm a product development and production manager. Stateless is an outsourced design, development, and production team servicing brands that are both small and large across the globe. You can check out our Makers Row page. It's makersrow.com/stateless. We have a partnership with Makers Row and now Embark Live. You can find our product team on Makers Row and our branding team on Embark Live. Embark Live is an online community that connects entrepreneurs and small businesses to business category experts. Make sure to sign up. And how I like to talk about Makers Row versus Embark Live is that where at Makers Row you go to find people to help you make the product, and Embark Live is where you go to find professionals who can help you with all the other aspects of your fashion business. So this has been a two-part series. Last week we talked about designing and developing for e-commerce, and today we're going to talk about designing and developing for wholesale. If you missed last week, I highly encourage watching it on Facebook because it is important to understand the difference between the two, and it's really the first decision you have to make when you start working on your brand, because your sales model determines everything else. Feel free to ask questions as we go, and I will also stop after each segment to catch up with any questions that I haven't been able to answer. So, designing and developing for wholesale. Before e-commerce, wholesale was really the most accessible way to sell your clothing without having to take on a huge investment and become like a brick and mortar retailer like the Gap or J. Crew. And though direct-to-consumer market has changed the industry, the majority of clothing brands out there right now, they still engage in wholesale business. The first thing is, if you don't have a major marketing strategy, you can't simply put up a website and expect to make sales. So selling your product wholesale is a helpful method of, getting more orders. It helps you hit your production minimum, and it also helps you move through inventory. Likewise, it spreads brand awareness, which can later drive e-commerce traffic to your site. Let's say you have a good store who carries your stuff, but they were sold out in this customer's size. That customer, they might have tried on the size that was too big, and then they come to your website and they order from you. But, wholesale is a tough game to get into, and it often takes brands like several years to really get a wholesale business going. So even a lot of people who do wholesale, when you first launch, you end up launching e-commerce, but with the, goal of building that wholesale business. Regardless, if you do wholesale or e-commerce, it usually takes you a couple of years to really find success. So it's not bad to, have your heart set on wholesale, but not, achieve that goal until later down the line. So like I said last week, before you start your line, you always want to identify your sales model, what it's going to be at the outset, because each model requires different practices. In this segment, we're going to talk about the aspects of your business that are impacted by a wholesale business model, and they're the same categories as last time, but oriented towards wholesale. So it's your calendar, your line assortment, your pricing structure, and sales deliveries and cancellation windows. So that's a little different than the e-commerce one because it's specifically regarding wholesale delivery. So you've established your sales model, and now you need to determine your timeline. I've said it every single live I've done, and I'm going to say it probably till the end of time, calendar is very important. So with wholesale stores, they have the right to cancel their order if you do not deliver it within the delivery window that you've agreed upon in their purchase order. So with wholesale, calendars are especially important. That's also why it's helpful for a new brand who wants to do wholesale to still go through a couple cycles of production, because just hitting your production calendar is hard as it is. I just realized I wasn't live on Instagram. Sorry about that, guys. Hi. Okay, so anyway, so going back, there are standard deliveries, but nowadays things are slowly changing to where basically the stores tell you what they want their what they want to have ship. And if you work with the Asian market, your delivery tends to be early in Europe, which means you have even less time to. So I'm using a lot of jargon here. Delivery windows, ship windows, cancellation windows, cancellation dates. Those are the times where, let's say if it's a fall winter delivery, the store tells you when they want to allow you to ship. And usually they give you a grace period. So it's usually 15 to 30 days. On the other hand, cancellation date. So if you don't hit within that window, the cancellation date is the last date of your ship window. What else did I say? I'll keep using jargon, and I'll try to make sure to explain it. So anyway, your standard delivery windows are as follows. For fall, you do August 1st to September 1st. And or September 1st to October 1st. If you have a really big line and you have a good wholesale business, eventually you would do 2 deliveries for each delivery. So you would be selling like things that are more like back to school, things like that, like the August delivery, your August through September delivery, and then things that are more like, scarves, winter stuff would be between your September and October delivery. Now, when you think of fall, usually you think of September. So the reason why you deliver in August to September 1 is that, the stores also have to prep, and especially nowadays, they got to do like photos and other things. So they need time to even just steam the garments to put them out on the floor. So they need everything needs to be done in advance. So that's why your ship windows are there like that. For resort and holiday, it's usually just one ship window, and it's usually October 15th through November 15th. For spring deliveries, for wholesale, it's usually February 1 through March 1 and or March 1 through April 1. Again, with the fall and the spring deliveries, those are your biggest seasons. So as you grow your wholesale business, you do tend to want to offer 2 ship windows, 2 deliveries. Again, these days stores have been kind of telling you what they want. So they might say, I know stores in Japan, you're like, okay, this is fall delivery, August 1 through September 1. They're like, actually, we need it in July. So that's rough for the Asian market. But in Europe, they might actually just say, well, actually, we only want it, we have a cancel date of September 15th for everything. So stores usually give a 15 to 30 day ship window, which is like a grace period. But if you cannot hit that delivery window, you must email that store and see if they're willing to accept a later delivery. Most won't, and then you're stuck with inventory that they ordered, but you still have to sell it. So that's why the wholesale calendar is no joke. So how do calendars work? Just like e-commerce, the calendar is built backwards from delivery dates. Generally, development takes 6 to 9 months at minimum, but for new brands in particular, it can take a full year from start of like design to your final fit samples. So just keep that in mind. Production tends to take 6 to 8 weeks. And then if you do any special things like printing or specialty dyeing, you want to add an extra 4 to 6 weeks into that production timeline. So again, when you're selling and you see a Japanese store wants it in July, sometimes you have to start your production before your sales even close, depending on who you're working with. So you have to be really kind of nimble in the wholesale world, but you also have to be super stringent with deadlines. So it's a little bit of an ebb and flow between being very, very structured and strict and being able to pivot. Alrighty, so These lead times, they're based on domestic manufacturing. I want to mention that, using stock fabrics. So if you have custom materials, you may need to begin raw material ordering with an additional 6 to 8 weeks prior to starting production. But I don't suggest that anybody, until they're a well-oiled machine, I do not suggest anybody in this audience to consider anything beyond custom printing a fabric that's already been developed. Custom developing fabric it has huge minimums, it has huge lead times, and you want to kind of know what you're doing before you get into that game. So, okay, let's see. So, let me just see. So yeah, okay, so I'm just gonna double check if there's any questions. Let's see, so we've got Wholesale now also includes fulfillment for retailers, so we need to add this cost margin into the wholesale price with practices, plus supporting with images and back-end documents. Okay, what you're saying, Paula, is Paula on Facebook about shipping. Something about that. So if you're selling to a store, like a brick and mortar store, they need to pay for the shipping. If they don't have a shipping account, you can add it to the invoice. As the brand, you are not responsible for paying for shipping to a wholesale store, to a wholesale account. You can, when you send your order confirmation, you can ask them if they want to provide their own shipping account, or if they want it to be billed back. And there should be a space in your your invoice that has tracking and your ship date in there. If you're drop shipping, it's wholesale because you need to have that price built in, but drop shipping is different because you sit on the inventory and then you ship to the customer. So I think what Paul is talking about, it sounds to me like drop shipping. There's a lot of stores that do drop shipping now, e-commerce stores that do drop shipping. And it's great because it's kind of like consignment, in a way, but you can also just keep that product and you can keep track of it. Consignment's tricky because unless you have a really good relationship with that store, you don't know what your inventory is there. You have to check in all the time. I've had instances where a store got broken into and product was missing and the store owner refused to pay for it. So consignment's a little tricky. I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you trust the store. Let's see. So yes, she meant dropship. Great. Okay. So, all right. So we talked about calendar. And, so before you can assort your line and start developing, you need to determine what season you're developing for. So here are the start and finish dates, beginning with fall. Oh my goodness, my neighborhood. I'm sorry. There's people blasting music. Happy Juneteenth. That's on Instagram. Okay, so for your fall wholesale calendar, you want to start design during the fall the year before, between August 1 and no later than September 1. Samples need to be fit approved no later than January 15th or so. You shoot your lookbook, your line sheet, and your product shots between January 15 and February 1. That's a short window. Remember that. Market is usually February and March. If you work with a showroom, you may even need to have your assets shot before January 15th. So just make sure you communicate with your salespeople from the get-go of what deliverables they expect from you, because if so, you might want to start like late July. It's kind of hard to get into the vibe of fall in late July, but I always say start as early as possible because stress is the #1 killer, right? So once you know from your salespeople what they want, your production PO and your fabric and trim ordering is non-negotiable. It needs to start no later than June 15th if you want an August delivery, and July 15th if you want a September delivery. Again, if you have the capital, if you have the cash flow, it would make more sense to start everything June 15th. And then if you have later deliveries, you already have it on hand and you can chill and you can pack those orders, or if you have a warehouse, they can pack it with less intensity. Because of the holidays in the United States, you would benefit from starting fall slightly earlier, like I said, like mid-July, at least the design part. Like just start thinking about silhouettes, just start thinking about fabric, colors, things like that, because time flies during the holiday time. Okay, so resort holiday wholesale calendar. This is an optional season. It's interesting because a lot of times like fall, winter buys will include resort and holiday, but once you get your business going, especially if you work with a showroom, they'll tend to ask you to also offer the off seasons resort and summer, particularly resort, because resort is holiday shopping and vacation shopping for the, what do they call them? The snowbirds, the people that leave the cold. So anyway, with resort, you want to start designing the winter before. So between like November 1 and no later than December. Your samples need to be fit approved the second half of July. You shoot your lookbook, your line sheet, your product shots between July 15th and August 1. I would recommend, if you're going to get into the resort game, to just develop it with with your fall delivery. Develop it at the same time, and then just have the time to, you know, deprioritize those from your factory's list. But I would really recommend that, because it's the same amount of work, and so if you do it all at the same time, it tends to be more efficient. But anyway, so market for resort is usually in the spring, sometime between August and September. There aren't sorry, that's not spring, that's fall. That's late summer. There aren't trade shows, so with to do your sales and stores that you work with, and you're doing your own sales and you have a relationship, it's really easy to develop it with fall, and then just show those samples to your stores like a little later, like aftermarket, and then, you know, just produce those small orders. Yes, please. I see on Instagram, I have some questions. Please ask away here. So last bit about resort, your production and fabric, your production, your fabric and trim ordering needs to start no later than August 15th, so that you can hit your mid-October shipping window. Again, here, because there's Thanksgiving and the holiday rush, it would be great to start August 1 or September 1 for a resort. Want to mention that resort is a super tight timeline. Ship windows are shorter. Selling season is shorter. So I would not recommend a new brand doing a resort season until you have been successfully shipping wholesale orders for at least 3 to 4 seasons. It's really, really hard to hit resort. Really hard, okay? All right. So also, since you still have e-commerce, it is nice to do a small resort holiday drop, even if you don't do the market. You can offer it to stores you already work with once you have your wholesale business in place. But again, I would recommend trying to put that in with your fall delivery, your fall development, I should say, so that you're just doing it all at once. Let's see. So I'm going to answer a couple questions later. I see them coming through, but I want to get through the spring and summer calendars. So spring wholesale calendar, you start design the spring the year before, ideally February, no later than late March. Samples need to be fit approved early August. You shoot your lookbook, your line sheet, your product shots, all between August 15th and September 1. Again, short window, fast. Life is really fast for those 2 weeks when you're preparing your assets. Market is in September or October. If you work with a showroom, you may even have to have your assets shot by January 15th, so make sure you ask your salesperson their plan. For spring, you start production in November for February deliveries, and January for March deliveries. Again, because of the holidays, if you're thinking about like, you need your samples by January 15th, you should really goal yourself to have your samples before everybody closes for Christmas. Right? So things to keep in mind, don't drag your feet, start as soon as possible. Okay. So summer, it's interesting. Even if you do, swim, summer is actually kind of a late window. It's not very often that people want a summer delivery, so I'm not going to break it out here. If you have a salesperson who wants you to do a summer delivery, ask them when they want you to deliver, and make sure to follow these guidelines of 6 to 8 weeks for production, up to 9 months for development. And again, if you want to get into the summer game, it's a short ship window. It's 15 days. It's usually like May. Develop it with your spring. Okay, so last thing I want to say about this is that since getting into wholesale is super hard, it would be good to consider launching your first and even your second direct-to-consumer. I said it earlier, I just want to reiterate that, because the wholesale calendar is super hard to get on, and it helps you to go through a full production run, because even if you work with professionals like Stateless to do your production, there are all kinds of delays that can happen. I'll mention a couple. Your fabric, it could be sold out and it's going to be delayed by 2 weeks because it's still on a boat. Let's see, what else could it be? maybe there's an issue with your production marker. Maybe there was a complicated style that you took to market that wasn't totally fit approved. Like if this was my sample, that I would definitely increase this. It's good enough to shoot. It's good enough to this distance here. I would increase that. It's good enough to shoot. It's good enough to show. But before you go into production, you need to do one more sample to make sure it's right. Things like that. So you need to build in time for the happenings that go on in this industry, and you cannot expect things to run smoothly, because when things run smoothly, it includes things being sold out, having to find a different vendor for this thing and that thing. That's just how this world works. So you want to safeguard yourself because you don't want to stress out. Okay, so I'm gonna look at questions now. This is on YouTube. If it's going to be your first line on your e-commerce site and your first capsule collection has about 4 designs, how do you decide how many pieces to manufacture of each size and color? That's a good question. So with Wholesale, you take your orders and they give you the stores give you a size buy, but I'll tell you, most stores buy in a range. It would be for every 1 small, they would buy 2 mediums and 2 larges on the men's side, and then 1 extra large. If it was women's wear, it's like extra small, small, medium, and large. Guys, there's way more sizes than this. I'm just trying to do some quick, easy math. But it's, again, it's a bell curve. It's like a 1, 2, 2, 1 ratio. So when it comes to e-commerce, that's a really hard thing, is that you're stabbing in the dark. One thing that's really cool about Wholesale, that is my favorite thing about Wholesale, is you can develop a whole giant line. You can have all these different colors. You can get as creative as you want. You don't have to produce anything that doesn't get ordered. You can, if you love it and you have the capital to produce it and you believe that someone's going to buy it, on your website. But with Wholesale, you really produce what the stores buy. When it comes to e-commerce, it's kind of like, that's why you should kind of develop a little slimmer, because you're deciding it yourself. You're becoming your own merchandiser here, and you're hedging your bets on what you think is cool and what you think will sell. Once you have buying and selling data, you'll learn. But for the most part, just follow that 1, 2, 2, 1 ratio, and you'll see, if you do Wholesale eventually, you'll see that that's actually mostly how stores buy. Again, I'm going to talk about Japan because I've worked with Japan a lot. Women's market and men's market, they usually tend to buy just like they'll buy like 100 size smalls, So you might that's not necessarily always the case, but it's just like the same, like an average women's shoe size is like 7 and 8. So you buy more of those. An average women's size are small and medium if you're doing a smaller range. If you're a plus size range, then, your average size tends to be like 18, 22. So these are the kinds of things that you should, if you're a shopper, you know what sizes are sold out fastest, right? So those are the ones that we tend to buy more into. Okay, so let's see. Is there anywhere we can find these dates? I can't write fast. I'm sorry. You can go back. So this is recorded on Facebook, and you can always reference back to Facebook. And everybody who joined Instagram Live, sorry, I didn't realize that I had to push live. I thought I had it on. So if you want to watch the beginning of this, I recommend going to Facebook. Okay, so great. Those are all the questions so far. I'm going to keep going. So now that you know what season you're designing for, it's time to assort your line. Generally speaking, if you want to sell wholesale, it's best to offer at least 7 styles in a variety of colors. Thinking about a rack at a showroom or a trade show, you want the rack to be full enough for the buyer to take you seriously, one, and you also want to offer a variety of options. I'm a big fan. Spring, always do a white. Fall, winter, always do a black. Some stores, it's just it'll guarantee sell. Navy colors sell really well. Yellows tend to be hard. Even now when yellow is like a more trendy, yellows you usually make less. So going back to the question from YouTube, you have to hit your factory's minimum. So unless you have a factory that's willing to do 25 pieces, most of the time I would say just assume that you're going to need to make like 50 units of a style. With that in mind, maybe the factory will agree. Sometimes they'll agree to, okay, well, we're not going to do 50 yellow. We can do 50 black and 50 navy. Also, though, sometimes black and navy compete, so you want to maybe do one or the other depending. But you can ask the factory, look, I'll give you 50 of these 2 colors that are selling well or that are easy to sell. This is applicable for e-commerce as well. And then ask, but can you guys just, without adding a surcharge, will you please agree to doing 20 of these yellow, something like that. I see one more question. I had a question about wholesale for subscription boxes. Like, what are the tips with that? I'll talk about subscription boxes in a little bit. That's a little bit different because you're gonna want product on hand. I'm gonna stay on this topic and I will answer that. Okay. Okay. So, but going back to your assortment, if you do the 7 styles with a variety of color, that gives the buyer options. But like I said earlier, what's really fun about wholesale is you can do, if you have the capital, you can do 20 styles. You can do 22 styles. You could do them with 3 colors each. You could get really crazy. You could do one purple jacket, in only 1 color if you offer enough options. And that's because you don't have to produce everything. And the great thing is you might be ahead of the curve, or you might really believe in, especially now that Instagram, it's like they just want to buy. And I don't mean to knock anybody if anybody watching is a wholesale buyer. I have good relationships with a lot of them, but in this climate that we're living in, a brand that's familiar on Instagram and is in a bunch of cool independent boutiques, they're going to keep getting those orders because a buyer knows that that's safe, right? So it used to be, before Instagram, buyers had to have like their own taste, so to speak, and now they have to, they can't just use their taste, they have to navigate it with like the trends that they know from Instagram. So you can believe in a style and you can show it to a buyer, and it might take them a while to get on board with that. But if you've already developed that pattern, it doesn't hurt. Next fall, show it again. Keep showing it. Believe in yourself. Believe in the styles that you're developing. Show it again. Don't produce it until you have enough money, or there's been at least 1 order against it, in wholesale, and then you can sit on the rest and for e-com and shoot it really well and market it really well and push that style. So okay. Let's see. Other thing, you can offer exclusives with a bigger line as well. So like some stores really love exclusives, and it's a great way, especially if you have like a good store who can afford to order, say 50 pieces, you can hit a production minimum. You can say, oh, you want that yellow? Can we do an exclusive where I have it on my website and you sell it only in your store? And then you can hit that yellow minimum with the factory without a surcharge, right? In US, it's fair to say that anything less than 50 units per style is a small production run. So just keep that in mind. And, if you do anything less, you will expect a surcharge. But like I said, you might be able to negotiate if you're working with, a few styles at the same factory. You may be able to say like, hey, I'm hitting the minimums here. Can you just do this one without the surcharge? And they might. I'm going to stop for a second and, no more questions. Okay. I'll answer the question about subscription boxes. I mean, if you do something like FabFitFun or whatever that company is called, they want like 1 million units. It's good money, but you have to have, they have to agree to doing a long lead time with you, because as you just heard, like development and production, it takes like over a year to go from start to finish on a season. So with subscription boxes, it really depends on the model of the company. If you have a lot of inventory and you're able to, I'm trying to think of something that's like more straightforward, underwear, if you're in accessories, no size kinds of things, subscription boxes are tricky for clothing. If you want to clarify, if you're thinking of doing a subscription box for your own company, this is my personal opinion. I don't think you should do that. I've worked at a couple of subscription box companies, and what they all ended up having to do was not do the box, because it's not the same as like a razor or a toothbrush where you're going to need another one pretty soon. At a certain point, even the most addictive shopper is going to feel excessive getting a box of clothes every even every 4 months. They want to have their own options. So, oh, she is in accessories. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know if you are a she. KK Fashion. So yeah, so for accessories, it's easier because there's only there's only one size generally, unless it's rings or something. But the box companies, what you need to do is ask them their delivery that they want it for, and you need to make sure that you have that time built in. If they're buying from your line sheet that with styles that already are developed, that's a lot easier. But just make sure that you have enough time to actually produce it. And if subscription companies, I used to make jewelry, and I did so well with subscription companies in my past, but it was short-lived. So keep that in mind. It came and it went. Okay, so once you've established your assortment, you are now ready to proceed with your design and development. I have extensively talked about during quarantine here. I've done these lives a lot, and we've talked about that a lot. So I would like to invite you to go look up those discussions on Makers Row's Facebook. So you won't get that information here. Is because we're talking about development, the process of development. And pricing is really important, and it differs greatly between e-commerce and wholesale models. I need to speed up because I'm supposed to do 20 minutes and I never do it. I always go over. So anyway, from the get-go, you want to ensure that whatever your prices are that you plan to sell your product at, you need to make sure that they're realistic. I mentioned this last time, but I'm not sure, if you don't have a lot of experience, how it works with getting pricing on your own. I know how to, like, if you show me a style and you tell me you want it to cost X, I can work backwards and say, okay, well, that means we need fabric that's this much a yard. That means we can only do that in Los Angeles. That means I know all of that stuff just off the top of my head from experience. So if you don't know that, you're going to have to go to a factory, get the pricing estimates, and you're probably going to learn. Sometimes we even have this happen because things change. We add embroideries, we add all these things. And I'm always like, hey, that's going to be kind of expensive. But then the designer says, oh, I want it anyway. You might find that you're going to have to move your pricing out further than you expected it to be after you actually get through the process, because what you get quoted at the beginning is not always necessarily what it actually ends up being at the end, because everybody has to do the like work study to figure out how long and how expensive or what the price is that they need to be charging you for the things that they're making. So anyway, how we determine cost, though, is that we take labor and your materials. So how your wholesale pricing model is structured is as follows. You take your cost of goods. I'll talk about cost of goods, how you calculate your cost of goods in a minute. You take your cost of goods, and those should be multiplied by at least 2.2 to 2.5 times to determine your wholesale cost. Then your wholesale price is multiplied by another 2.2 to 2.5 times. So if your hard costs for a dress are $65, your wholesale price should be somewhere between like $143 to $165. And then your retail price is somewhere between like $285 and $360. This differs greatly from e-commerce because you only need to mark up your costs for e-commerce by 2.2, 2.5 to see a return. So that's why I kept saying that this is so important to know the difference, because we hear a lot of people who in the back of their heads want to do, we work with a lot of startup brands and we work with established companies as well. And all of us have, I've been doing this since like 99, all of us have been doing this for quite a while. So, and what you never will see is if you start off as an e-commerce brand and you try to become a wholesale brand, unless you're making 1 million units and can take that overseas to get your labor down, you're not going to be able to make a wholesale margin if you started off as an e-commerce brand. So if you decide to be an e-commerce brand from the get-go and only do e-commerce, it's a big commitment, and you want to make sure that you have a strong marketing team. If you maybe want to do wholesale one day, you should at least, when you launch, mark your cost of goods up by like 4 times, 3.5 times, because keep in mind that when you launch, you're doing the lowest units that you'll ever do probably, and so you're paying surcharges, and in this industry, the more you make, the lower the prices. So just keep that in mind. So if you want to do a wholesale one day, but you launch as e-commerce, if you do like a 3.5 times markup, eventually, if you get big enough, that'll equal the right wholesale margin. So how do we calculate cost of goods? Sorry, it's going to be hard to write this down, so you might want to rewind and go back on Facebook Live. So you take your fabric cost and you multiply it by your yield. I did this last time. I told you guys this last time, but I'll do it again just in case. You take your fabric cost and you multiply it by your yield for all your fabrics. You get your yields from your pattern maker or the factory. You take your trim cost and you multiply it by the yield for all trim. Same thing, get that from your factory. And then you add those two together, and those are your material costs. Then you take your labor costs, your cutting, sewing, printing, finishing, and you add those together. Those are your labor costs. You add your material costs and your labor costs together, and those are what we call the COGS, or your cost of goods. If you want to add shipping in, you can add like $1.250 in, but you don't have to. But yeah, so like I said, if you want to do wholesale one day, it's really essential to put some kind of markups in there, because basically direct to consumer is half the price. So maybe that's not quality and you never want to do wholesale. Then go ahead and commit to just doing that times 2.5 markup. So anyway, as you realistically, most new brands, they actually have to take margin hits when they first launch. Like I said, because when you make more, your price goes down. Even with wholesale, you might want to make your margin only be like, 1.9 markup, something like that, knowing that you'll grow to get that two times 2.2, but definitely never take like a 1.3 times markup, because you're never going to grow big enough to hit that margin unless you're making hundreds of thousands of units. And at that point, it's not something that you should rely on. Okay. I do want to reiterate that you cannot just decide what your price is without doing this math. So if you don't have the experience to do this, it's really helpful to hire a professional to help you with your costs, to help you get what factory you work with, what fabrics you work with. Everything you do is determined by what you want your retail price to be. And I'll tell you that 9 times out of 10, a new brand who comes to us, their retail prices, their target retail prices are usually, they don't match with what want materials they want to use or the quantities they want to make, etc. So this is a nuanced thing that requires, for me, I don't know how anybody would be able to do it without experience. I just don't. So keep that in mind. I'm going to see if there's any more questions. I would love to have you examine the wholesale model for my brand. Do you do consultations? Yes, you can find us on Makers Row, and Stephanie or Robin will answer your questions, and we'll do some consultation on like an hourly kind of basis. Happy to do that. Okay, duty included in COGS. So, okay, on Facebook, the question is duty included in COGS? Well, so we're talking about domestic manufacturing here, and we're talking about buying stock fabric here. Most new brands, that's how you're going to work for the majority of your arc of your career. So you don't have to pay duties. If you're using this information and you're thinking about overseas, Makers Row is really focused on domestic manufacturing, so I don't want to stray from that, but yes, include your duties in your COGS. Okay, so yes, is this live being saved? You can go on Facebook and reference this live any old time. Okay, I'm gonna speed up. I'm so long-winded. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about is why the deliveries in the calendar are so important. The whole point of having a fashion brand is to sell product. So in order to sell product, you need to have it on hand at certain times of year. At Stateless, we build a time and action calendar that outlines every single detail of the project with corresponding dates to ensure that your target delivery dates are realistic and that they're met. The hardest thing to do for new fashion brands is to get on calendar, but it is so important. Try your best, start as early as possible, give yourself time. If you're new to the industry and you don't have someone working for you who knows how to stay on calendar, it's gonna be tough, real talk. It's gonna be tough for even people who have been doing it for decades like us, So it's just, the reason is that there's a lot of deliverables to manage, right? Like your design has to be finished by a certain time. You have to have your fabrics assigned by a certain time. You have to know what fabric vendors to work with. You have to know what factories make sense to work with you. Your target retail prices have to be accurate and realistic. Working back from those prices takes, know-how. There's so many hands. There's a fabric vendor, there's trim vendors, there's your marker maker, your pattern maker, your factory. And then you have to like liaise with your salespeople. It's a lot. So it's why the calendar is so elusive and so hard to get on, but it can be done. We do it all the time, but just be gentle with yourself and try to give yourself a lot of time. And that's why I say, even if you want to do wholesale, it's good to try to get through one season of production. Go ahead, go to the wholesale market. I don't mean to be a naysayer, but most of the time, new brands who nobody's heard of, they don't even get wholesale orders the first time anyway. So keep that in mind. So don't print 500 lookbooks and go to Capsule or Project in Vegas. Don't do that. Print 15. If you have a good salesperson, if you have a showroom who you've found, I will say that that's a really opaque part of this industry. I've been in this industry forever. I know like 6 salespeople, and just because I know them doesn't mean that your brand fits with them. Do you know what I mean? So finding a good sales, and the easiest way to get there is to sit at a trade show, but it's not like you go to a trade show and buyers just come flocking in. Buyers, they walk by with their arms crossed, and they don't like, if you're like, hi, they usually like run away, because they're like, they don't want to be sold anything. They want to decide that your brand is something that works with their store. And they're thinking about, do we have another brand that looks like this? Where in the store would this be merchandised? What price, what other brands would it sit next to? Things like that. So they need that space to think. So it's a weird balance when you're sitting there at a trade show trying to sell your stuff, buyers walking by, you want to be warm and friendly, invite them in. Hopefully they want to come in. But most of the time when you go to a trade show, you really don't come back with sales. So it takes a while. Okay. So last thing I want to say is that the calendar I did give you guys, there is buffer time in there. Okay. But like, how it is. Like yesterday I wanted to ship a bunch of stuff in time by 4:00 when FedEx picks up across the street, and I didn't have the right packaging material. So I didn't get there. It's okay because there's buffer built into the calendar. I'm the development manager and the production manager. Like I need to get things out and I need to be on time. A day is okay. But if every time we need to do that we take a day, that's why the calendar slips. So you want to be on it. So anyway, that's really all I have to say. I'm going to see if there's any other questions. So if I'm only interested in being an e-commerce brand, do 3 to 4 times your COGS. You can do as little as 2.2 times your COGS for e-commerce. Last talk we did, I actually do recommend a 3 to 4 time because it helps to level the market. Part of the reason that stores got kind of hit hard, not just because e-commerce is easier and we can like sit there in bed and shop, but if a shirt from a boutique is $120 and a seemingly similar quality shirt from Everlane is $60, some people are going to buy that $60 shirt, and that hurts the stores. And that's because e-commerce can take a lower price point. So if you want to sell at a lower price point, go ahead. But I do recommend trying to actually just to level just to keep the whole fashion industry healthy, to try to do at least like a 3 times markup if you can. From Facebook, I'm a retailer, but now want to start a brand new handbag line. Where do you suggest I start? We do handbags sometimes. Look on Makers Row. There's some good handbag manufacturers in the United States: Los Angeles, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. San Diego. There's really good handbag manufacturers. Handbags are hard because they're 3-dimensional, and there's a lot of hardware and stuff. But in a way, you don't have to worry about fit as much. I'm just going to make sure, are there any other questions here? Yeah, I think Makers Row will try to save it, but I'm so sorry. I feel so bad. I didn't start it at the same time. So it will be awkward when people will be like coming in halfway through. Great. So that's the two-part series. I hope you guys found it valuable. As I said, if you think about doing wholesale one day, even if it's 10 years down the line, like we got from Facebook, maybe consider doing a 3 times markup at e-commerce, so that one day as you grow and your units grow, your COGS go down, and then you have room to build in a 2 times markup for wholesale and that 2.2 times markup for retail. One last thing I want to mention. The reason you do a 0.2, not just a 2 times markup, big retailers, I mean, who knows? The industry is changing right now rapidly. You know, rest in peace, Barney's. Like, that's like the most devastating thing for me. I love Barney's. Retailers, giant retailers like Nordstrom's, they want a discount. So when you do a 2 times markup and they want a 20% discount on their wholesale order because they're giving you a big order, you're actually going to lose money. So if you're going after big stores, Opening Ceremony, also rest in peace, but they used to also ask for a discount. I think every major retailer asks you for a discount. So you want to have that built into your market. And stores who are, it's an industry standard. First of all, it's like none of their business how you mark it up, but it's an industry standard to do that, because we know that some bigger places ask for that discount. But you know, you don't offer that discount to small stores. Small stores wouldn't ask for it anyway. But that's why you want to try to, at least on your wholesale markup, do a 2.2. And a rookie mistake is to only mark up from there 2 times, because your stores also want to be able, every store wants to be able to put it on 20% off at the end of the season and still get at least a 2 times markup. So that's why you use your rule is really a 2.2 times markup. Okay. All right. Well, that was really fun. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, go back to Facebook and watch these to reference some of that information that you might want to write down, and look us up Stateless. We're makersrow.com/stateless, and make sure to sign up for Embark Live. Okay. Thanks, everybody.